things. First of all, it's your bold headline. And the reason we put it in bold is because we're going back to scannability. It will stand out as a section header. It will help divide the parts of your paper, but also it will call attention to itself. In writing recommendations, you want to write them as imperatives. Does anybody here know what the imperative is? It's also known as the command form. All right, anybody get a dog? Oh, come on, no. Okay, I got one person with a dog. All right, thank you. Dog, you're training them. Sit, stay. It's not like you sit there and say, you sit, you stay. You start with that verb, okay? And the you is implied. That's the imperative voice. So a lot of recommendations are written as implement a program to, develop a program to, or let's see, restructure, blah, 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 blah. They start with a verb, they leave out the subject. It does a couple of things. It makes it very action-oriented, but it also sounds very authoritative and confident. And this might be the hardest stretch for most of you. It is for a lot of graduate students or people without a great deal of experience to actually help shore up their confidence about it. But you really do have to pretend that you are an expert and that you know what you're talking about, even if you don't feel like you are that much of an expert. It's like a fake it till you make it situation. So using that imperative is part of faking it, okay? It's sounding authoritative. So that's reflecting your main point, your conclusion, your ultimate recommendation. Underneath that, okay, the order is up to you, but you need to give them a sense of why does this recommendation make sense? Why does it work? Why will it work? And also how? How are we going to get it to happen? So under the why, okay, what data supports this point? Or if you don't have data, what theory supports this idea? What theory says, you know, okay, when we're creating change in an organization, looking at it this way is the right way to motivate, you know, people to work together in harmony and sing songs every Friday afternoon? I don't know. And what are the benefits? Or alternately, like, who are the winners and losers? Who's going to benefit from this policy? Who's not going to benefit from this policy? That's one thing to think of in terms of what is the agenda of your audience and what is your agenda. Who are the people who are going to win and lose? What are the obstacles? What is the opposition going to say? And how would you possibly combat that? And how? What are the mechanisms? Is this a policy that we need to create? Is this a program? What is this? How does this work? And what's the feasibility? You know, what's the timeline? How much is it going to cost? So on and so forth. This is the hairiest part of all, okay? When you're talking about a short, succinct memo, getting into feasibility to a certain extent is difficult because you could get lost in the weeds. There's a great amount of detail that you could end up providing, but then it would end up overwhelming what you need to achieve in 5 pages. Okay? So you want to give top line ideas of ballparks, like roughly how long, how far, like who would be part of it, who would be your partners. Give a sense of, like, are we talking about like $10, $10,000? Are we talking about $1 million? Like, well, what would this cost, a program like this, if possible, if you can give these? All right, let's take a look at some examples. All right, so the first one, this goes back to the first intro that we looked at. Maintain the current fare of $1.25 for off-peak trips. Okay, so we got our bold headlines, and I guarantee before you even looked at everything else, even though I'm reading them for you, that you looked at both bold headlines before you looked at anything, okay? And that, again, stands as a marker for, okay, this is section number 1, this is section number 2, but here are the conclusions, all right? And this first one I also like because it actually suggests doing nothing. It's saying, okay, we recommend you don't change a thing, but it gives a really good explanation for why. Adopting all proposals included here is projected to produce a net revenue increase of $67 million. Coupled with potential cost savings from a reduced number of transactions and improved system efficiency, it is unnecessary to adopt additional fare increases at this time, particularly given the substantial increase in capital funds recently secured by the MTA. Okay, so we don't go into the weeds of how did we come up with this $67 million figure. We just present it, right? This is it. If they want to know what that is, then they can come and ask you about it, like how you arrived at that number, or it's something you can put in your appendices if you feel like it's that important, right? Otherwise, we're just getting a couple of sentences that basically say, hey, you've got enough good stuff going on, don't mess with this, it's not broken, all right? Just so you know that that is an option to say, okay, this doesn't need to change, but you still have to explain why. Implement a peak fare surcharge of 50 cents per trip, bringing the total charge to $1.75 per trip. In line with your previously expressed desire for innovative fare pricing models, a peak fare surcharge of 50 cents per trip will help raise revenue for other fare initiatives without depressing ridership. So here we're getting both a sense of like, why is this a good idea, and how does it work? Okay. Peak fare surcharges are also progressive in that they help shift fare costs away from low-income riders. So we're getting a sense of, oh, who benefits from this? Low-income riders are benefiting from this because they're likely to use, who are more likely to be off-peak riders. Higher peak fare costs will also cause more riders to vary their travel hours to utilize the system during off-peak hours. So again, oh, here's how you, the client, benefit from this. Here's how MTA benefits, because suddenly we're spreading out the number of people. Equalizing train exit and entry times, as well as providing for a more spacious, pleasant rider experience. Overall, the diffusion of passengers across off-peak hours will raise system efficiency and more accurately match charge fares to user costs. Like if you wanted to go more into the feasibility or the implementation of it, then maybe you want to start to define what are those peak hours or the off-peak hours. And maybe if you have the predictive analytical tools, you can give a sense of this is how much it will start to spread people out. You'll see that you have X many people traveling between hours Y and hours Z, so on and so forth. The other thing I want you to notice about this is that they are not the same length. Not all recommendations need to have the exact same weight or amount of space spent on them. Some of them don't need the same amount of time and space. Some are answered very simply and succinctly. Don't feel like they all have to have the exact same page space. If you're done, you're done. Let it be done. This I want to show to you, so this is a graphical representation of recommendations. And it actually comes out of a 20 or 30 page Pew Center for the States reports. Is anybody here familiar with Pew Centers? Okay, a couple of people. I swear to God, if there's nothing else you come out of this with, remember the Pew Centers, because they are awesome. They have amazing, amazing research and studies, and on top of that, they do the same studies like every 5 to 10 years. So they have longitudinal data. So they look at how are things changing over time. Okay, so this comes out of a 20 or 30 page report about, it's called 1 in 100. It's about the fact that 1 out of every 100 people in the United States is in prison right now. Okay, we are land of the free, home of the brave, and yet we have more people in prison per capita than any other country out there. And so they've put together this entire presentation with case studies and analyses and predictions and so on and so forth to discuss this issue. They've come up with recommendations. They can get away with doing a graphical representation because it's a 20-page report. You might not be able to because this takes up a full page and you don't really have that much space to play with. But I want you to see it this way because this is one way to see the breakdown of a recommendation. So we've got a two-part recommendation. You can reduce prison admissions or you can reduce the length of stay. All right, and underneath that, under reducing prison admissions, you've got two levers, two mechanisms that you can talk about. And under each one of those, you have 3 actual implementable actions under those. If you were writing this in your memo, you would totally be allowable to do this in a bullet point. You could have reduce prison admissions be your bold headline. Give a sentence or two explaining, okay, this will reduce X many people going into the system at any given time. And then underneath it, you could have mechanism 1, boom. Mechanism 2, boom. Here are the 3 actions that you need to do for that, 3 actions to do for that. For the purposes of your policy case competition, you might have to give a little more explanation as to why these will work. This is very much focused on implementation and action, and a really well-balanced memo will give us a better sense of why as well. Why will this work? Who wins? Who loses? All right. One more body sample. Decrease wage theft by unionizing a segment of the workforce. So I'm not going to read through this whole one, but I wanted you to see that within a section you can have multiple paragraphs as well. One of the things that I like about the way this is written is that the student has, okay, here's a why, here's a how, here's a why, here's a how. But then she takes the next step, and in the next paragraph, she starts to talk about, okay, we are likely to face opposition. Like, we might get some blowback on this. And here's a line about how I think you should address this. So you need to know that it is available to have multiple paragraphs and address a couple of different issues underneath one topic heading or one headline. Closing. This is the best closing of all. It's nothing. You've already given your conclusions, right? So there's no need to summarize. And with memos, they are a very utilitarian document, okay? They do not need to have an ending. There are plenty of memos out there that just end. When they are done, they are done. They don't need to go on. That said, this is also an option. You can finish, and this is, I think, a throwback from a different era when we weren't quite so aggressive and action-oriented, or maybe it's an apology for being so aggressive and action-oriented. And it's this reminder that at the end of the day, it's still a person writing the memo and a person reading it, and we have a human connection to one another. So there's this little sentence at the end that's something along the lines of let me know if you have any questions. I'm looking forward to speaking with you further about this. Oftentimes, just like you guys are doing a presentation and the memo, a lot of times memos go out just before some sort of conversation or presentation, right? So it is assumed that a conversation will happen right before or right after it. So it's totally within what's allowable to say, I look forward to speaking with you about this further. Please let me know if you have any questions or if you'd like to talk about this. And then there's the brownie points version. Okay? Like I said, in the real world, one memo is just part of a larger conversation about an issue, right? So if you're providing background information, there is a next step, which typically is, okay, we've had the background, now let's talk about solutions for this problem. And then after solutions, maybe we're going to pull one out and we're going to start talking about, risk assessment for this. And maybe the next memo is going to be about program development, and the next memo is going to be about evaluating that program, and so on and so forth. If you really want to be a smart player in this game of constantly getting the next memo, whether it's just a matter of being the staffer everybody calls on to do something, or it's you're a nonprofit and you want to get the next contract to do a project, then you plant the seeds for the next step, okay? You think a couple steps ahead and at least give a tease of what would be next. So let's look at this one. These initiatives offer the building blocks for land reform in Centropico. Critics say that reform takes too long and will slow economic growth. Therefore, it is important to have faster initiatives that prove the administration's commitment and ability to effect change. Restructuring of the DRR will most likely be an ongoing project and take several years to fully transform. However, the continued show of the commitment to change is essential to keep continued support. So what you don't know about this is that the memo itself is just recommendations for change. What the student did in the context of this memo, however, is started to do that sort of risk assessment about communications. Started to think about, okay, we're going to have opposition and blowback to some of this, so we need to start thinking about how we're going to confront that. What is going to be our communications going out around that? So that's planting the seed in her closing paragraph for maybe the next memo, which is, okay, how do we start to frame the communications around this so that we can control the situation? Basic style. All right, so we always want to be clear and concise. Clarity trumps conciseness, meaning, again, going back to the whole jargon thing. If there is something that you know, like one or two words for, that you think your intelligent non-expert won't necessarily know, that would be one situation where it's worth it to spell it out, to use a few more words just to make sure that your audience member understands it. Be authoritative. Okay, authority comes in the form of supporting your case and avoiding editorializing. So it's not enough to just say, this is significant, or significantly, importantly. I hate those words. I would so much rather you show me, use the data, give me the evidence that shows me this is significant or that this is important. All right? Use the command or imperative. It's that implement this, you know, what are the other words? I'm getting tired and it's the end of my day and I'm losing my words. So implement this, construct this, restructure this, all of those. Avoid passive constructions. This is this academic holdover. Okay, passive constructions do one of two things. Either they take the active, responsible party for an action and they put them at the end of the sentence, or they leave that responsible party out altogether. We commonly use phrases like, research was done, or data shows that, blah, 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 blah. Who did that research? Who is responsible for that data? We often think that in academic writing, like we're not supposed to introduce ourselves into the equation. In policy memo writing, you should take credit for the work that you've done. If this is your research, say, our research shows that, okay? Or if somebody else did it, say, you know, Ebsen and Benson's research demonstrates that.